There is one date in this account that does not align with the rest, and once it is noticed, it cannot be set aside. On the 30th of June 2026, Prince William was in Aberdeen. The engagement was public, photographed, attended by staff and residents of a housing association, and recorded as part of a program marking its third year. Every detail entered the official record and was reported by correspondents across Britain that same afternoon. The following day, the 1st of July 2026, would have been the 65th birthday of Diana, Princess of Wales. On that day, the diary remained empty. No statement was issued, no ceremony arranged, no portrait released at the customary hour. For an institution that observes anniversaries with exacting precision, the most significant Diana milestone in 5 years passed without a single official word. That silence forms the center of what follows. When the surrounding details later emerged, they touched a public that had long believed its capacity for feeling on this subject was exhausted. The sequence requires careful attention, for the dates themselves carry the weight of the decision that was made. This is not an account of a press release. It is the record of a son who has spent nearly 3 decades learning how to carry private grief while living under constant public observation, and who, on the day his mother would have turned 65, determined both how she would be remembered and who would carry that memory forward. The gesture was never solely personal. It reaches the emotional core of the monarchy in a practical rather than a poetic sense. Diana was never only William's mother. She remains the most widely loved figure of her generation within the royal family, the woman who altered public expectations of what the crown should feel like. The institution has never fully recovered its balance on the question of how her memory is to be handled. Her recollection functions at once as asset and liability. Each time the palace approaches it, accusations of exploitation arise. Each time the palace keeps its distance, accusations of erasure follow. Beneath these reactions lies a question that has remained unanswered aloud for 29 years. Who now decides how Diana is remembered? Every possible answer exacts a cost. To claim institutional authority risks appearing to have appropriated a woman's memory as it once appropriated other aspects of her life. To concede the decision entirely to the family risks surrendering the single most potent source of public affection the monarchy still possesses. Silence has therefore remained the safer course for nearly 3 decades, until the choice was removed. For most of those years, the institution retained partial control. The statue in the sunken garden, the anniversary services, the carefully measured references to a much-loved figure were all managed, approved, scheduled, and maintained at a temperature the palace could regulate. This year, the balance altered. From the available evidence, the decision rested with her son. He answered the question by doing almost nothing in public on the day itself. The sequence that followed matters more than any isolated detail. First comes the particular weight of the 65th year and the distinct quality of grief it carries. Second is the established pattern of how William has marked his mother's memory and the ways this occasion diverged from earlier ones. Third is the gesture itself, examined piece by piece, including the element involving Princess Charlotte that caused the account to travel as widely as it. Finally, there is the quiet determination this episode makes about Diana's legacy and about the generation that will carry her name long after present arguments have faded. The facts form the necessary foundation. Diana Frances Spencer was born on the 1st of July 1961 at Park House in Norfolk. She died on the 31st of August 1997 at the age of 36. William was 15, Harry 12. The image of the 2 boys walking behind her coffin through central London remains one of the most haunting public sequences this country has recorded, and for many over the age of 50, it is still the first association the name evokes. She is buried on a small island in the ornamental lake at Althorp, the Spencer family estate in Northamptonshire. Her brother, Charles Spencer, selected the site deliberately. A public grave would have drawn continuous visitors for decades. He preferred a place that could not be transformed into a permanent queue. The island is private, surrounded by water and trees, situated on land belonging to her family rather than. For nearly 30 years, it has remained one of the few sites connected to Diana that neither the public nor the palace can reach or manage. Every other memorial attached to her name has passed through official processes. The statue was commissioned, approved, unveiled, and photographed. The fountain in Hyde Park underwent committee scrutiny. The Kensington gates were adjusted and moved on from. The island at Althorp has never been subjected to such procedures. It belongs to the Spencers alone, and that fact alters the reading of everything that followed. To understand the enduring public response nearly 3 decades later, it is necessary to recall what she actually altered, beyond the more familiar narrative. narrative. In January 1997, 7 months before her death, she walked through an active minefield in Angola, wearing protective equipment in full view of the world's cameras, compelling attention to a problem that governments had preferred to overlook. She was criticized at the time. A British minister described her as a loose cannon. The Ottawa Treaty banning anti-personnel mines was signed that December. At the Middlesex Hospital in the same year, she shook the hand of a man dying of AIDS without gloves, at a moment when substantial portions of the public still believed the illness could be transmitted by touch. One photograph, without accompanying speech, shifted behavior more effectively than any official campaign of the period. She also took her young sons into homeless shelters and hospital wards so that they would encounter the people the rest of the establishment routinely passed by. William has spoken of this himself. In a documentary broadcast in 2024, he described his mother taking him and Harry to The Passage, the homelessness charity she supported when he was around 10 or 11, and how she made those present feel at ease while ensuring her sons understood what they were witnessing. These actions share a method. She did not argue. In Angola, she walked. At the hospital, she extended a hand. At The Passage, she brought her children. Each instance worked because she placed herself physically at the point of contention and allowed the image to speak. No one in that family had employed the technique before her, and none has matched it since. She paid a price within the institution for each of them. The minefield earned her the label of loose cannon. The handshake unsettled senior figures. Taking 2 young princes into a homelessness project was judged unsuitable, yet she was proved right on all 3 counts, and by then she was gone. The institution that had briefed against her spent the following decade quietly adopting her methods without acknowledging their source. That practical inheritance, rather than any title, is what William received, a way of moving through the world. It is the inheritance that renders this year's decision intelligible. A 65th birthday carries a distinct quality of loss. 65 is the conventional age of retirement, the stage at which ordinary lives shift from building to reflecting on what has already been built. A 50th is a milestone, a 60th a landmark. 65 marks the beginning of a final chapter, and most people recognize it because they have sat at tables where that recognition is shared. This is the version of Diana the country never encountered, the silver-haired campaigner still appearing in places others avoided, the grandmother to George, Charlotte, and Louis in photographs that will never exist, the elder presence within a family she had tried, in her short adult life, to make more human. There is a further detail that cuts more sharply than the rest. Diana has now been dead longer than she lived. She died at 36. 29 years have passed. The living woman is steadily outweighed by her absence. Those who remember her as a person rather than as footage grow fewer each year. Her sons are in their 40s. The children who watched the funeral from school halls now run companies. Within the next 15 years, the number of people in Britain who can say they once saw her in a room will fall below those who cannot, and after that she will belong entirely to the record. Each missed milestone sharpens the sense of what was taken, because the distance between the woman who died at 36 and the woman she might have become continues to widen. There is a softer reading of the week. A family marked a difficult anniversary privately, as any family might, and a son simply missed his mother. That reading is true and probably accounts for most of the truth. There is also a harder reading. The man who will one day be king confronted a decision about the single most emotionally powerful asset the British monarchy still possesses, made it deliberately, and made it without consultation. Both descriptions fit the same week. Both appear accurate. The second is the one rarely spoken aloud. The record of how William has handled his mother's memory in recent years shows a consistent pattern that preceded this birthday. He has never been silent about his grief, yet he has been deliberate about its placement. In recent years, the markings have read as chosen rather than performed, and the distinction appears in the timing. On Mother's Day, he shared a previously unseen photograph of Diana crouched in a field of flowers, holding a small hand, accompanied by a single line about remembering his mother that day and every day. The image was widely reported, yet it arrived without a charity announcement or a documentary to promote. It stood alone on a Sunday and was followed by silence. Through Homewards, the homelessness program he founded through the Royal Foundation in 2023, he has continued the precise work she introduced him to as a boy at The Passage. 6 flagship locations across the United Kingdom operate on 5-year commitments aimed at making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring rather than permanently managed. A statement lasts a news cycle. A program with multi-year funding continues the work under her name long after the papers have moved on. He chose the version that carries a budget. That choice returns turns attention to the 30th of June. The day before his mother's 65th birthday, William was in Aberdeen at Langstane Housing Association, one of the 6 Homewards sites. He met residents and staff. He helped assemble welcome packages, the ordinary items a person needs on the first night in a flat of their own. Kettle, bedding, the small necessities that turn a space into a place of rest. The visit marked 3 years of the Aberdeen program. Afterwards, he posted about the difference between a crisis and a fresh start that a furnished home with proper support can make. Place the 2 days beside each other. The 30th of June was public, photographed on the record, devoted to the cause his mother had walked him into as a 10-year-old. The 1st of July, her actual birthday, carried no announcement at all. A royal diary is prepared weeks in advance by people whose professional responsibility is to know where dates fall. The notion that the Prince of Wales found himself performing homelessness work in Aberdeen on the 30th of June by coincidence does not withstand examination. He placed the public portion of the week where it could accomplish practical work and reserved the day itself for private purpose. Royal biographer Robert Jobson has observed for years that William is determined his children should know their grandmother as family rather than as headline. That determination has shaped nearly every decision he has made about her memory since becoming a father. The pattern across the past decade is consistent. This year produced the most personal expression of it. Sources familiar with the family's plans indicate that William approached the birthday differently from any previous occasion. The sequence unfolded in 3 parts. The first concerns a visit. Rather than mark the day with a public appearance, he is said to have made a private journey to Althorp. There is no official confirmation of that visit, and none will be forthcoming. Official engagements appear in the court circular, the published record of working royal activity stretching back decades. Private movements do not. If William traveled to Northamptonshire in his own car on a weekday, that day exists in no palace record and never will. Anyone claiming definitive proof either way exceeds the available evidence. Silence from the palace about a private movement is the normal state and conveys no information. Those close to the family say he wished to stand at the one place that has always belonged to her alone, away from cameras, away from institutional oversight, on the island where she was buried by her own family, on land that remains under Spencer control, the single location connected to Diana that no press office has ever scheduled. For a man whose entire life has been lived under observation, every significant moment photographed and examined, the choice of privacy itself constitutes the statement. The fact that the matter is still discussed weeks later confirms the point more effectively than any released image could have done. The second element concerns those he brought into the moment. An insider reported that William wished his children to understand who their grandmother truly was, the woman rather than the icon, the person who would have loved them rather than the face on magazine covers they will eventually encounter. He has begun sharing her story with George, Charlotte, and Louis in a deliberate manner. Photographs, small ordinary memories of the kind that never enter biographies, because biographies record decisions and speeches while the intimate details remain the family's alone. This is a father converting grief into inheritance of a different order. In these accounts, inheritance usually refers to houses, money, and titles. Here, it is the quieter transfer that may prove the only kind capable of lasting change within this family. The third element is the one that traveled furthest. Reports centered on Princess Charlotte. Now, she carries Diana's name, Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, announced 2 days after her birth in May 2015. The inclusion of the third name performed considerable work in a small space. Those close to the family increasingly observe that she also carries something of Diana's warmth, a remark made often enough by enough different voices that it has moved from compliment to description. It is said that William spoke with his daughter about the grandmother whose name she shares, and that Charlotte has begun asking the questions only a child reaching toward a story she arrived too late for can ask. One source described the exchange as William handing his daughter not merely a memory but a responsibility. The fair reading is straightforward. A father whose daughter is old enough for real questions told her about her grandmother, showed her photographs, and such conversations occur in millions of households. The only distinction here is the identity of the grandmother. The harder reading is that an 11-year-old was given some understanding of what her name will require of her in public life, delivered by the one person alive who knows precisely how that feels, because it was done to him. No one in this family is permitted to grow into such knowledge gradually. The country decides when the looking begins, and it usually begins early. Both readings appear accurate. The second explains why William conducted the conversation himself, in private, on a day with nothing scheduled, rather than allowing it to reach her through institutional channels as it once reached him. He was handed his mother by an institution and a television schedule. He is handing his daughter hers at a kitchen table. An 11-year-old being told about a grandmother she will never meet is one experience shared by countless families. An 11-year-old whose name functions as a national reference point being told what that name will require is an entirely different conversation. William understands that weight more completely than anyone else alive. He is the one who received it at 15 with the world watching. The contrast at the center of this account is what makes the emotion earned rather than constructed. For most of his life, William's grief was something the public demanded to see. At 15, he was required to walk behind his mother's coffin through central London while an estimated 2.5 billion people watched. Old enough to comprehend what was happening, young enough to hold no power over any part of it. He has spoken since of the difficulty and of his wish that no one else be asked to do the same. Harry has been more direct. Neither has ever described the experience as a choice. That week, his mourning became public property. The institution determined its appearance, its duration, the placement of cameras, and the expectations placed upon a boy in a dark suit. This year, the dynamic reversed. No procession was arranged for public view, no official portrait was staged, approved, and released at an hour chosen by an office. There was a father, his children, and the memory of a woman that neither cameras nor palace could claim. The reversal is the actual news, though it does not resemble news. It resembles a man having a quiet week. The consequence is clear. In 1997, the institution owned the grief, and the family absorbed what was decided for them. In 2026, the family owns the grief, and the institution absorbed what the family decided. 29 years were required to invert that relationship, and it occurred without a single word of announcement. William has said for years that he wants his children to know Diana as a person, that he speaks of Granny Diana with them, that she is present in the house. On her 65th birthday, that quiet intention became visible. The woman who once said she wished to be a queen of people's hearts is being remembered by a son teaching her name to his children, not by an institution issuing a statement, not by a committee approving a wreath. There is real weight in the sense of a circle closing slowly and out of sight. Diana raised William to feel things openly inside a family that largely did not, and she paid a price for that quality. William is now raising Charlotte to carry a grandmother she will never meet inside a family where such behavior is no longer penalized because he is the one who decides what is penalized. The grief did not end. It found a smaller room with fewer people in it and with someone in charge who was present when it began. Grief handed down deliberately ceases to be only a wound and becomes something a family owns. The significance extends beyond a single birthday. The element that will remain true in 20 years has little to do with a private journey to Northamptonshire. For nearly 30 years, the question of how Diana should be remembered belonged at least partly to the institution she both elevated and unsettled. The record of that handling is not comfortable. In the week she died, the flag over Buckingham Palace remained unchanged while the country gathered outside the gates and grew angrier by the hour, because protocol dictated that the standard flies only when the sovereign is in residence, and no one inside the building could see past protocol to the crowd. Days passed and the national mood darkened before the flag was lowered to half-mast. The palace has never fully recovered from that week, and those inside it know it. What followed included a memorial fountain in Hyde Park that required 7 years of agreement and open to complaints about its design, a memorial garden, and a statue unveiled in the sunken garden at Kensington in 2021 on what would have been her 60th birthday by two brothers who by then barely spoke to each other, in a ceremony so carefully managed that the photographs feel like a formal exchange rather than a family act. Each memorial was handled properly, approved, scheduled, costed, and signed off. None of them ever felt as though it had come from a person. That pattern was broken this year. The fair assessment is that every official memorial was undertaken in good faith by people attempting to do the right thing under intense public pressure, and that institutions cannot behave as families do because they must remain consistent, and consistency is the opposite of feeling. No one in the palace sought to erase Diana. They sought to hold something enormous at a manageable temperature, which is the function of institutions. The harder assessment is that managing something at a manageable temperature for 29 years is a slow method of removing it from those to whom it belongs. Each approved wreath and agreed form of words moved her memory a little further from her sons and a little closer to the office. By 2026, the distance between the Diana the country remembers and the Diana the palace refers to in its statements had grown so wide that the two scarcely described the same woman. The harder assessment appears closer to the truth, and William seems to have reached it long before outside observers. Faced with a milestone the institution would once have organized for him, he did not hand it over. He asked for no service, no wreath-laying, no portrait, no line in a bulletin. He took a day that belonged to his mother and spent it on the one piece of ground over which the palace holds no jurisdiction, with the only people who will still carry her name in 50 years. The consequence is larger than a gesture. Her memory is passing out of institutional hands and into the hands of the children and grandchildren who know her, in Charlotte's case entirely, through her son's insistence that she not be permitted to fade into a collection of approved phrases. That transfer is the central fact. Everything else is detail. The following observation is interpretive rather than confirmed. It does not appear that William planned the week as a deliberate move against anyone. A man in his 40s with a daughter old enough to ask real questions recognized that he is the last person alive who remembers his mother as a mother rather than as a subject, and that whatever he fails to hand on now will leave with him. That is a deadline, not a strategy, and it explains the timing more convincingly than any other factor. 65 is the birthday at which the imagined future version of Diana ceases to be plausible. Few can picture her at 80. The last realistic image of the woman she might have become expires around this point. After that, she becomes pure history, handled by historians and by whoever controls the archive. He placed himself ahead of that transition by a matter of months. One further piece of evidence supports the view that the week was deliberate. The public portion and the private portion performed the same underlying work. In Aberdeen on the 30th, he stood inside a housing program built on the exact cause his mother had shown him as a child, and spoke of a home to return to. On the 1st, according to the reports, he went to the one place she rests with the children who will carry her forward and said nothing publicly. One is the work, the other is the reason for the work. He accomplished both within 36 hours and permitted no photograph of the second. That is the behavior of a man who has decided what his mother is for, rather than a man managing an anniversary. The intensity of the public reaction across Britain when these details surfaced was disproportionate to the scale of the events themselves. No one wept at the news of a private visit. A private visit is not news and is not moving in isolation. What moved people was recognition. Millions of a certain age remember precisely where they were standing in the first week of September 1997. They remember a 15-year-old boy walking behind a coffin with his head lowered while they watched from their living rooms and felt the discomfort of watching. That memory was never properly filed away because the country was never able to do anything with it. There was no verdict, no lasting object for anger, only a funeral, a flag, a song rewritten for the occasion, and a gradual return to ordinary life. An entire generation placed an unresolved week in a drawer to discover, 29 years later, that the boy is now the one deciding, and that what he decided was to take his daughter aside and speak to her of her grandmother, closes something many have carried since that week, without ever setting it down. The tears were for the memory the gesture reawakened, not for the gesture itself. The empty diary on the 1st of July contains a turning point. Turning points within this family are usually visible only in retrospect, from a distance of about a decade. For 29 years, the arrangement was straightforward, even if never written down. The institution held Diana's public memory, and the family held the private one. The two were kept carefully separate, and the private one remained almost entirely silent because the family that held it had been trained from childhood to say nothing. That arrangement ended quietly this summer on a day with nothing scheduled. The son now holds both. He decides what the public sees because he controls the only version anyone will believe. He decides what the family carries because he is the only one left who was present. He has begun handing the second portion down inside a house in Windsor to 3 children who will still be speaking of her when everyone currently working in the palace has retired. Project the scene forward 20 years. George will be in his 30s, Louis an adult, Charlotte a woman in her early 30s carrying her grandmother's name into a public life of her own in a country that will still look at her and think of someone else. That is the responsibility the source described. It is not a burden she chose, it will not be optional, and her father knows exactly what it feels like because the identical thing was done to him at 15 before 2.5 billion people. The difference, and it is the entire difference, is that he is preparing her for it at a kitchen table rather than allowing an institution to deliver it on a scale. Diana will not grow old. She stopped at 36 on a Sunday morning in Paris, and each year the distance between the woman in those photographs and the world the rest of us inhabit grows a little stranger. The girl who carries her name is growing up, and within that ordinary fact lies the quieter truth of how those we lose continue. Not in monuments, which are places one visits once, photographs and leaves. Not in statements, which are written by people who were not present and approved by people who never met her. Continuity occurs in the small, transferred things. A name spoken aloud at a kitchen table, a photograph given to a child old enough to ask a genuine question about it, a habit of entering rooms others avoid, passed from mother to son, and now from father to daughter, without anyone once labeling it a legacy while it was happening. That is what Diana received this year in place of a ceremony, and it is difficult to believe she would have preferred the statue. The diary was empty on the 1st of July because the most photographed family in the world has finally recognized that certain things cease to be real the moment a camera arrives. That recognition was not taught by the institution. The institution taught the opposite at 15, in a dark suit, before the world, and it required 29 years to unlearn. His mother taught him the other approach in shelters and hospital wards when he was 10, and too young to understand he was being taught anything at all. He has now taught it to his daughter. George will receive a different inheritance from the same woman, because he is the one who will eventually hold the office she married into, and everything she learned about it the hard way remains the only useful preparation available to him. Louis will receive her the way youngest children usually receive family stories, secondhand and slightly lighter. Charlotte receives the name, and the palace is left holding precisely what it has held since 1997: the wreaths, the wording, the anniversaries, the fountain, the statue, and the approved phrases about a much-loved figure. Every object it commissioned in order to keep her memory at a manageable temperature, and no one remaining inside that building possesses the standing to instruct her son on what to do with the rest of her. An institution can commission a statue, approve an inscription, fund a fountain, and hold a service on the correct date every year for 3 decades and still lose the essential thing, because none of those actions requires anyone to have loved her. The transfer that occurred this summer required only one qualification, and no palace on earth can issue it. For 29 years, the institution managed Diana's memory with sufficient care to keep it safe. While it did so, the boy they required to walk behind her coffin grew up, took the only part that mattered, and quietly moved it to a place they will never again be able to reach. What has taken place is a quiet reversal of ownership. For nearly 3 decades, the public memory of Diana was treated as something that needed regulation, something that had to be held at the correct temperature so that it would neither overwhelm the institution nor leave the family exposed. The result was a series of formal memorials that satisfied procedural requirements and rarely satisfied the deeper expectation of those who had felt a personal connection. This year, the approach altered without announcement or confrontation. William did not negotiate with the palace over the form of the observance. He simply claimed the day for himself and for the children who will still speak her name when the present generation of officials has long departed. He directed the public expression of her values into practical work in Aberdeen the day before, and he kept the private expression of her memory within the family and, by all accounts, on the one piece of ground the palace has never controlled. The empty diary on the 1st of July 2026 therefore ceases to look like an absence and becomes a statement written in the only register this family still trusts when the stakes are high enough. The statement is that the living memory belongs to those who still carry her features in their own faces and who are now old enough to begin asking what those features will require of them. The institution may retain the wreaths and the approved language. The living portion has moved.